Hello and welcome. I'm Carol Cram, host of the Art and Fiction podcast. This episode features Zoe Disigny, author of The Art of Traveling Strangers, listed in the visual arts category on Art and Fiction at www.artandfiction.com. Zoe Disigny worked as a college art history professor for 25 years, and in the summers taught art history courses and led tours in Greece, Italy, and France. For 3 of those summers, she established a business in Paris, offering art tours for American travelers. Zoe lives in Southern California with her husband and devotes her time to writing while continuing to travel internationally. The Art of Traveling Strangers is her debut novel. Welcome to the Art and Fiction podcast, Zoe.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here.
Well, I'm excited to talk to you. We share so many common interests, but particularly a love of travel, especially European travel, and of art. So you've combined both these passions into the art of traveling strangers. Tell us about your inspiration for the novel.
I would love to. I've got a short answer and a long answer, so I'll start with the short one. First of all, the inspiration for the story itself, where that came from. I used to be a tour guide in Europe in the summers, and I had some really interesting experiences. But I had one particular tour that I did that was really unique. And it was a story that I always told people because I thought it was so entertaining. So that is the inspiration for the core, the sort of seed of the novel. The inspiration for actually writing a novel is a whole other thing. It's not something I really ever thought about, but I always wrote. When I was in college, I used to write really silly rhyming. It's not really poetry, just rhyming things. In the 1950s, I would have been a perfect person to do those jingles, see the USA in your Chevrolet. I mean, really silly rhyming things. So then when I had my daughter, I decided I was going to write children's fiction, but it was always going to have a lesson. I was going to teach those kids. And of course, it was going to be in rhyme, really silly rhymes. Well, that went nowhere. And then when I was a college professor, I didn't particularly care for my art appreciation textbooks. There's so many different ways to teach that subject. So I thought, well, perfect. I'll write a companion textbook. So I started doing that, and I was told pretty quickly that since nobody knew who I was, nobody would be at all interested in what I had to say about art appreciation. So, okay, end of writing career, nothing else going to happen. So, 2013, I'm at lunch with a girlfriend, and I tell her, of course, my story. I think it's the only story I have about this tour guiding experience. And at the end, she said, "You should write that." And I thought, I should write that. And I thought, this is perfect. I was retired recently, but once a teacher, always a teacher. And I still had that desire to keep teaching, not in the classroom anymore, but just keep teaching. So I thought my tour guiding story would be a great way to teach art history, and then also a nice way to sort of insert some life lessons, especially for women. So yeah, that's where it came from.
Of course, you've been an art history professor, and because I was a teacher as well, another thing that we have in common.
Yeah,
I think both of our husbands are artists as well. Is that not true?
yeah,
Wow.
I know.
So your background as an art history professor would have been incredibly helpful for you when you were writing this novel. How did it help you?
Oh, well, in terms of all the research that goes into the story, or all of the facts and that kind of stuff, a lot of that is part of what you just acquire over 30 years of teaching. I taught mostly the same thing over and over, and it was survey of art history, and it was almost exclusively European art history in those days. Um, so you got real familiar with the basic stories. So as I was writing and I wanted to bring in a certain element into the actual plot of the story, I could think of an artwork that would be in the area where we were traveling. And I could then say, okay, so we're going to go to that artwork next, because with that artwork, I can get Viv to say something that's going to help move the story along, or I can say something about the artwork that'll help move the story along. So that was really helpful. Once I got there, I had to make sure I had my facts right. So I did do, research on top of that, but it wasn't anything really deep and detailed. It's not like I was writing a scholarly dissertation. So it's mostly things anybody could find out, if they just Googled it. So, but it's fun. I love research, so it's fun.
Well, and what was so great about the novel is you really made art accessible. And I think a lot of that, as you say, had to do with the character of Viv because she was so irreverent.
Yes, yes. And
Yeah, because she
as
would
a
say
teacher,
things that weren't art history like, and but kind of got a different perspective. You must have had a lot of fun with that character.
I did. She was really fun to write. Claire, the art historian, was not as much fun to write, but Viv, I didn't really, the real person that I based this story on, I didn't really know this woman at all. And I didn't really find out a whole lot about her when we were traveling together. So I had to make up her backstory. So I kind of made it up as I went along, depending on what I thought maybe would make the story more spicy or more interesting or something like that. And that was a great fun because I could do anything I wanted. She already was wild and crazy, so I could just throw in some more wild and crazy stuff. So yeah, she was fun to write. I'm glad you liked her.
Oh, very much so. So this really was based on when you took somebody around Europe, just like Claire takes Viv around. You
It
actually did
really
that.
was. Yes, it really
Wow.
was. Yeah.
Great
There's,
job.
well, at the time, she was so confounding that I really didn't know what to make of her. And it was just one of those bizarre experiences that you never have. I mean, I never had anything like that again. And so it sticks with you and you keep thinking about it. And I don't know, it was just a very interesting thing.
It is extremely. It was a wonderful way of basing your novel in order to, well, talk about art history, but also to show the development of Claire, which we'll get back to in a minute. But I just wanted to talk a little bit more about the art because I love the inclusion of the four Davids by Donatello, Michelangelo, Verrocchio, and Bernini, which is a David I had to look up. I have been to the Borghese Gallery, but I don't remember that David. So why four Davids? Why did you decide to include all four in the novel?
Well, I love that you just said that because when I talk to people about my book, inevitably, the one comment they make, I mean, almost like 90% across the board is either I never knew there were four Davids or I loved learning about four Davids that seemed to be the thing that really fascinated people the most. And that was a real surprise to me because as an art history teacher, when you teach survey of art history, it's a natural as you're going from, proto-Renaissance to Baroque to take this one subject, which is the same subject, and show how it evolves. And then you have this perfect way to explain how the style grows and changes. I just didn't know that so many people were not familiar with all of them. I thought maybe Verrocchio's would be the one that would be least, people would be the least familiar with. But yeah, I don't know. It just seemed like a real natural to me. And actually, in the story, as we're traveling from place to place, that was a perfect way to bring in my not so subtle art history lessons that I keep dashing in there by talking about the four Davids. So I like
It
them a
was
lot.
perfect. And yeah, I was actually surprised to find out that I really only knew the two, Donatello and Michelangelo. I did really not know the other two. And I mean, I love art history and I've studied art history, but for some reason I missed those two. So, which David is your favorite? Or is that even possible?
Oh, isn't that fun? That's a question in the book. Actually, I think Claire asks Viv that,
I
or vice
believe she
versa.
does. Yes.
Yeah, that's pretty impossible for me because I like them for different reasons. I could probably say that Verrocchio would probably come in last. I think it's an incredible sculpture, but I don't think it does anything to really evolve what we already knew about the Renaissance. I think it's a marvelous comparison to Donatello's in terms of how the two artists were able to depict two very different personalities. And that's wonderful, to study. But gosh, I don't know, between Donatello, Michelangelo, and Bernini, I think Bernini is incredible. He has so much emotion. And he was such a master of carving marble. I mean, he could make it look like anything. And maybe not seen as well in his David, but Apollo and Daphne,
Oh,
that just takes your breath away.
I've
So
seen that one. Yes.
Yeah, I don't know. They're all great.
They are all great, and you just bring them alive. So, anybody who's even a little bit interested in art history will love this novel because it teaches you love, but it teaches you in an interesting way, which I think
Okay.
why it's so much fun to read. So it's a wonderful travelogue of Italy and art in the 1980s, but it's also the poignant story of one woman's coming to terms with her life. So why did you choose to pair her story with the art history?
I I mean, the art historian is based on me. I mean, I can be really honest about that, and probably anybody would figure that out when they know I'm an art historian. And I was going through difficult times at the time I was leading that tour. So that was an easy thing for me to bring in. And actually, it was never my intention to do that when I started. But because I knew so little about what writing a novel really was, I thought my novel was going to be that tour guiding story. And I typed it all up. I mean, I knew it by heart. So I typed it all up. And when I was done embellishing and adding everything, and it was only 20,000 words. And I thought, well, that's not a novel. And it didn't have an arc. It was just a travelogue with, these two mismatched people. So I had to come up with something more than that. And so for me, the easiest thing to do was to remember or think about whatever what my life was like at the time. And then it seemed like, well, I could tie that in. And it's not my life, but it's based on things that I experienced and feelings I had, so which made it possible for me to bring that in. I don't know that I would have thought of that otherwise. So,
Yes, because the journey that you went from writing it down, your first 20,000 words, to ending up with a novel, I think is very interesting. I read a little bit about it in your writer's notes, but tell us a little bit about that, going from your travelogue to actually writing a novel, how that all happened.
oh, it was a mess. It took
I
me
bet it was.
it took me 9 years to finally
Yeah,
get the book published. This sounds
I
familiar,
totally
doesn't
get
it?
that.
Yeah.
Yep.
Because I had no idea what I was doing. First of all, I had no idea how to write a novel. I didn't know anything about publishing industry. I knew nothing about genres. I read everything. I read across the board. I read anything that sounds interesting. I read nonfiction, fiction, historical fiction, romance. I don't care. I don't pay any attention to what its category is. So I didn't know any of that. So to me, when I look back on it, the way it started was I had this seed. I mean, I thought it was the whole thing, but it was a seed. And so I had to sort of nurture it. And so what happens, of course, when you grow something, it just goes, and so it went everywhere in the wrong direction, sometimes in the right direction. And I'd write these huge things, and then that would make no sense. And I have to throw that away. And then I'd write something else. And then I'd go to a conference and I'd think, oh, that's what I need to do. And then I'd go back. So it really, truly, was a mess. I was going to say, don't ask me about my writing process. I don't recommend it to anyone. And hopefully
I
I'll
don't
never
think
do it
any of
that
us have a clean writing process. I think it's a myth of the person who just sits down and writes a novel. It's not possible. Or it's messy. It's difficult. It's like bringing up children. It's
way. Good
really, really
analogy.
hard. But good for you because many people can have an idea for a novel, and I'm sure people come up to you and go, "I got this great idea. You should write it." Yeah, right.
Yeah,
But you went beyond that. You actually learned how to write a novel, and that shows there's a lot to learn, isn't there? It's not just write it down.
great. And I think if you never went to school to learn that to begin with, people say, oh, she just got a master's in creative writing. Who cares? Oh, wow, that's big because there's so much to it that's under the surface, like the tip of the iceberg stuff. I had no idea. I
No,
still don't know, I'm sure, half of it.
well, I mean, I learn new things every single day. I'm on my sixth novel, but
I know, I'm so jealous.
constantly getting better, or hopefully getting better, and learning and growing. Yeah, that's this is so much fun.
Yeah,
It's kind of a
yeah.
lifelong pursuit.
Yes, yeah, I agree.
Well, like me, you've come to this a little bit later, like after your main career was over, you decided to write a novel, which I think is very inspiring.
Yeah, it actually, I tend to do things. I thought about this also. If I get excited about something, I tend to just jump in.
Yeah.
And It's usually something I know absolutely nothing about, and I think that's why it excites me because it's so foreign, and so I'm going to learn a lot of stuff. But it's always the hard way. I always do it the hard way instead of learning about it first and making some, rational decisions. And I just don't seem to do it that way. So, yeah,
I think the creative process is that's just what it's like. It just is. As I said, it's messy.
yeah, messy.
So, would you like to do a reading for us from The Art of Traveling Strangers?
I would. I would.
Great.
It's the very beginning. I just think it at least sets the stage the best that anything could do. So this is chapter 1, just part of it, just part of it.
Perfect.
The odor, a peculiar blend of disinfectant, ozone, and jet fuel, tainted the air, but enticed me. I liked the smell of escape. Taking a deep breath, I pressed my head against the cold window and watched Los Angeles shrink below me into a cubist painting. Those once massive buildings of concrete, glass, and steel were now the abstract geometric shapes of Picasso. I smiled. Life imitating art. That idea had always intrigued me, the belief that art could change our perception of reality. But this time, my attraction to the concept was even stronger. It offered hope. If chaotic LA could transform into a well-designed composition, why couldn't I? Leaning back in my seat, I embraced the escapist fantasy and pondered the art form I'd want to mimic. Certainly not cubism. It was too cerebral, and I already spent way too much time in my head. Expressionism was also out, too emotional. But the work of Niki de Sant Phalle struck a chord. She was part of a 20th century art movement intent on creating a new reality. I liked that, and I adored her work. She was known for her whimsical sculptures of triumphant women, an art form I'd be happy to emulate. I envisioned myself as one of her creations. Imposing female figure wearing bold primary colors, lustrous metallic wings, and twirling confidently on tiptoe. But just as that vision began to take hold, a cabin light above me blinked off. Ladies and gentlemen, the captain has turned off the non-smoking sign and you are free to smoke at this time. Please refrain from smoking in the aisles, lavatories, and non-smoking sections of this aircraft. Thank you for your attention and enjoy your flight. Enjoy my flight. Now that posed a challenge. Although I was grateful to be traveling to Europe far from the emotional turmoil of home, my getaway plan had a serious flaw. The 30-something woman seated next to me. She chewed her gum with mindless enthusiasm while reading the July issue of Fashion First magazine, apparently to discover the health benefits of crotchless pantyhose. Her name was Viv Chansey, and I, Claire Markham, a 30-something myself, would be her art guide in Europe for the next 3 weeks.
I just love that right at the very beginning you include Niki de Sant Phalle, who you don't hear mentioned very often, but she's fabulous. So hopefully that will inspire people to go and look her up. Have you been to her? It's called the Tyrell Garden in
No,
Italy.
no. We're going again this fall, and I thought maybe it'd be closer to where we're going to be in Tuscany, but it's like a 2-hour drive from where we are. But I was thinking, oh, this time I'll get to see it. She has a wonderful piece in Escondido. It's called Queen Califia's Magical Circle. It's near San Diego, but it's this little park. Nobody's there. I mean, it's just sitting in the middle of this park, and it's a similar kind of environment, except smaller, and filled with all of her mosaics and every single material you can imagine, and these fantastic composite beasts and impossible to understand things. It's so full of fantasy and so full of imagination and life, and it's just delightful. And there's never
Oh,
anybody there.
she's amazing. Actually, I'll put links to that one, that garden, and also the Tyrell Garden in the show notes. And
Have you
even if
seen
it's
the
2 hour
Tyrell?
drive, try and see it.
So
Sorry, what'd
you've
you say?
seen it. You've seen it.
Not the
The Tyrell
Escondido
Garden.
one. But
No,
oh
but
yes, we have
yeah.
been to the Tarot Garden in Tuscany. Yes, I
Uh,
have pictures on my Artsy Traveler website of it. But
oh,
if you can go, it's
go.
fabulous. Yeah, it blows you away. It
Yeah.
really is amazing. And of course, there's her big sculpture in Paris that everybody knows, the Stravinsky Fountain.
Yes, I
So yeah,
love
I
that
love that. I
too.
thought this is a great start to a novel. Niki de Sant Phalle. All right. I'm sure I'm not
Yeah.
the only one that loved that. I also like that you include the work of James Tyrell, the contemporary artist, who I've only really just heard about. So that was interesting. Where was that again? I can't remember, like geographically.
That's at Count Panza's villa in Varese, which is just outside of Milan. Yeah, it's a really interesting place because it's got this incredibly old, traditional palazzo, and then in it it's got these really super modern things. And you go into each room and you don't really know what you're going to see. So it's some of them are environments that were designed specifically for the room, and then other times it's artworks that he acquired. He was such a great collector. But yeah, it was just a thrill to go there. It's open to the public now, but when I did go, it really wasn't open to the public, so it was just my traveling companion and me. And we really did lie down on the floor and look at James Turrell's skylight, which
Yeah,
was
so that's one
fabulous.
place I don't know. We were just in northern Italy, so next trip we will seek it out for sure. There's always
Yeah,
something new to see in Italy. It's
it
amazing.
always is. So I'll go to see the tarot card sculpture garden, and you can go see Count Panza's villa, and we'll compare notes.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, what would you say is the principal theme of the art of traveling strangers?
Well, I guess one of the things that I always was hoping in the end I think it's an uplifting story, and I wanted it to talk about finding your wings, especially as a woman from my era, even though we were all into the women's lib thing and everything, but it doesn't really happen just because you stand around and, protest. Your life goes on the way it had gone on for your mom and dad for the most part. And so some of us took a long time to be able to really become that independent, strong-willed, know your own mind, trust your own mind kind of a person. So that's one of the themes that runs through it. Of course, the other theme is I just hope I get people to fall in love with art and travel. So if that did happen to anybody who read it, I'd be thrilled. That would be wonderful. Or to get somebody to maybe look up somebody in the book that they were reading, like maybe Niki de Sant Phalle, and say, well, I don't know who that is. Now I'm curious. But yeah, I think the main thing is about finding your wings as a woman.
Yes, it's interesting because it's pretty much a similar theme to my fourth novel, which is my contemporary one, Love Among the Recipes, where a woman of a certain age goes to Paris and she's had a bad marriage and, finds herself. So it's a timely thing to even now. It's still
Yeah.
it's definitely something for us, so, self-realization. And I noticed you have a blog called The Art of Visual Listening. So tell us about that.
Yeah, it's in a series. I think there's 12 in the series, and it's basically introduction to art, which is what I
Yeah.
taught for so many years, at least part of what I taught. And I just think a lot of people, because we aren't educated in art really. The last time you take art is after kindergarten. I mean, nobody teaches it, and you certainly don't get art history. I mean, at least that's my recollection. My daughter didn't get any of it. So it's kind of some simple things, but it's the kind of thing where, to me, looking at a work of art, if I didn't know anything about a work of art or anything about art or history, oftentimes I would think, what's the big deal? Like Mona Lisa, everybody thinks she's so grand. Well, why in the heck is she so grand? By the way, I don't think she is any more than a lot of other great artworks, but you don't have anything to hold on to. But once you have a few things to hold on to, then it's really fun to look at that art. You can start analyzing the composition. You can see how clever the artist has been to draw your eye through it. You can start picking out symbolism because you've seen enough works of art that use the same kind of symbolism. It becomes like a treasure hunt, I guess. But you
Hmm.
need to know the clues, to get there, or starting points. Oh, we use complementary colors. That's why it looks so vibrant. Or that's what it's about, that kind of stuff. Just all those basic elements of art.
Yes, how to appreciate art. So you can find the blog on Zoe's website at zoedisigny.com, and I will have the link in the show notes.
Thank you.
So, as you know, one of my goals with the Art and Fiction podcast is to inspire other authors. So, what's one thing you learned from writing your novel that you didn't know before?
Let's see.
Just
I
one.
didn't know anything before. No, I think the one that I found most astounding, how's that? The one that I found most astounding is the publishing world.
Mhm.
It was so foreign to me. I mean, I'm not a businesswoman, so I don't really know a lot about any other businesses, but I know a little bit. I mean, I was in education, and that's a really bureaucratic business, but it has such strange and arcane and specific things about it that I had no idea. I mean, as I said, I didn't know that if you wrote in a certain genre, certain genres, your book needs to be between this number of words and this number of words. I didn't know that. And I thought, why? And I didn't understand why there wasn't a genre for my book. My book is theoretically women's literary fiction, which tells you absolutely nothing except that it's geared toward women. What I need is a genre that says women's literary art, travel, education, fiction. Then you know what you're going to read. Anyway, so all that stuff was real crazy making to me. And I thought a lot while I was going through this about the self-publishing that is becoming so prevalent and how the traditional publishers, the few that are left, are scrambling to figure out how they fit into this new game. And it just reminded me of the Impressionists, you know, in the 19th century in France. There was the salon, which was the same as our publishers today. And you could not get anyone to see your artwork unless the salon accepted you. And of course, tons of people got rejected and no one ever knew their work. And it's very much like our publishing system, but it's changing. So the independent publishers are getting a chance to put their work out there where they never would have gotten a chance before. So it's exciting.
Well, and it keeps changing. And I agree. I love that we all have choices now as authors. There's not just one way. There's many different ways of getting your work out there. So I agree. It's a very exciting time. So actually, on that note, what advice would you have for someone such as yourself who came to writing relatively late in life, like after your main career?
I don't think it's a great idea to jump in feet first, which is what I did. Although I talked to somebody the other day and she said, well, you know, if you hadn't done that, you probably would never have written a book.
That's right.
That might be true. But it really helps to know some people that have written books. I mean, I didn't even know anybody who'd written a novel. I mean, to have some people who've written books, to know somebody who works in the publishing industry, to talk to a bookseller, you know, go into your bookstore and talk to a bookseller and ask them some questions. Or I didn't do any of that. I didn't know any of that. And I think especially later in life where you don't have a lot of time to do a lot of things, I think it would be wise to start cultivating people, people that can not only help you maybe to find a agent or something, but can show you the ropes. And I found a wonderful woman. Well, I was more than halfway through the book, and we've become fast friends. Her book was published just before me. We're almost the same age, and it was her first novel. And oh my gosh, everything she could tell me was gold. And she just means the world to me. And I thought, shoot, I wish I'd have known her before we started writing. We could have done the whole thing together. So,
That's really good advice. And I totally agree with that. Like I suddenly have a much broader range of people in my life, mostly virtual, but that's okay, but are other authors. And I never knew it. I was like you. I didn't know any authors really when before I became one myself. I mean, I was always a writer, but not in fiction. And then surrounding yourself with like-minded people who are doing what you're doing and writing novels and learning and growing, that's gold. Going to a lot of conferences is a good idea,
yeah,
taking courses, etc.
yes.
But yeah, finding other people who are doing what you're doing. This is why I have the Art and Fiction podcast. I just want to talk about writing with people. So, what are you working on now, Zoe? Are you working on a new novel?
I am. I am working on a sequel. It took me a couple of years to recover from finishing the first one, but I also was really stuck. I had thought I wanted to write a sequel because I think my story lends itself to a
Yeah.
sequel. And I like writing about art, obviously, so that would be a natural direction for me to continue in. And since my book ends in Paris, I don't think that spoils it for anybody. I thought the sequel would start in Paris. So it actually ends up starting 10 years later.
Oh,
And so Claire, the art historian, goes to Paris and has a whole new adventure, in just mostly in Paris, probably a few side trips. I'm not that far into the details yet, but mostly in Paris. And again, not with Viv, but with some other students, and it'll be their journeys together through the artwork that they encounter. So,
sounds wonderful. Anything set in Paris, I love.
oh, I know, me too, me too, me too.
I know. Well, thank you so much, Zoe, for chatting with me. This has been so much fun.
Thanks, Carol, and I'm so happy to finally get to see you face to face.
I've been speaking with Zoe Disigny, author of The Art of Traveling Strangers, listed in the Visual Arts category on Art and Fiction at www.artandfiction.com. Be sure to check the show notes for a link to Zoe's website at zoedisigny.com and links to other places we have mentioned in this podcast. You'll also find a link to a 20% discount on a subscription to Pro Writing Aid, a fantastic editing tool for writers. If you are enjoying the Art and Fiction podcast, please help us keep the lights on by donating a coffee on the Ko-fi website. The link is in the show notes. Also, please follow Art and Fiction on X and Facebook, and don't forget to give the Art and Fiction podcast a positive review or rating wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks so much for listening.